Hey everyone, so this will just be a bit of a longer video, but just about the I suppose the good things that we can learn from COVID, and this is particular I suppose for the UK and the experience of some people here, but it won't be for everyone of course. But even if it didn't apply to you at the time, there are some methods I suppose you can pick up from the video that will apply now, and that won't be specific to the UK I suspect. So if you have a listen. Hopefully it'll be good and beneficial for you. Remember, it's not financial advice, but just just some ideas really. If you could like, subscribe, comment on the video, and if you put the notifications on, that'd be great as well. Yeah, just let me know any thoughts of how you're finding the videos, or if you'd like anything else covered in future videos. I'll have a look at those. But yeah, back to this one. So obviously COVID is quite a long time ago now since it started. But I suppose with the time that's passed, it means that then you can have a look at patterns. So some of the patterns that we can see here in the UK with savings, there's quite a lot of savings early on. So in 2020 where people had potentially kept their income in full. And then they just moved to remote working. So you've got the general benefits of that, of potentially a similar wage, whether it's the same or, similar anyway. And then you've got potentially lower costs of, if you drove into work a lot or commuted a lot, you've got all those costs that you're potentially not spending out. And then, I suppose depending on how, how you handle things like lunch and coffees and things like that. Imagine if you were buying those out every day, Monday to Friday, quite easily you could be spending, even if it's just like a meal deal, £3-4 a day. And £3 or £4 a day might not sound a lot, but to make it easy, say if that's £4 a day times 5 days a week times 46 weeks a year, that's not far off £1,000. And that's if you're, I suppose, spending money on lunch, but it's a low amount. Imagine quite easily you could spend double or triple that. So, you're talking between maybe 1 and 3,000. By the time you add up everything, easily you can pay £3 for coffee. If lunch is then £10, you're at triple that amount. So it'd be not far off £3,000 if you did that every day. For a 46-week portion of the year. So really a lot of money. So it's not overly surprising that I suppose when people couldn't do those things, so like early on in lockdown, a lot of those things weren't as easily accessible, or maybe people were just cautious of doing them even if they were possible. But if you imagine £1,000 to £3,000 a year, if you're saving that and you're still getting the same wage, that's that's quite a big amount to then be able to save or invest. So that's a lesson that you can kind of transfer where possible. Is that something that you can do now, because most people, so I think it's 1/3 of people in the UK, and the number actually goes to about half of people in the UK have less than £1,000 in savings, and young people I think is 16 to 24, and I think that's the Financial Conduct Authority kind of did the research on that. But yeah, so roughly a third of adults, or if you're talking about young adults and specifically, it's maybe about half of young adults don't have £1,000 in savings. And I suppose the result of that is effectively you don't have, if that applies to you, you don't have a kind of maybe what would have been called like a rainy day fund or an emergency fund. So, if your boiler breaks, if your car breaks, you won't have that. So that's like a really good starting place to have. And imagine if you're saving, call it £3,000 on food, food and drink in a 1 year period. It's not overly surprising that kind of meant that people could potentially save a portion of that, towards that, for example, £1,000 buffer, for emergency fund. And then obviously on top of that, a lot of people weren't commuting. and easily you can spend that kind of money on commuting in a year as well. So whether that's electric for an electric car, if that's diesel, petrol for a car there, if that's a rail pass, they can easily be multiple hundreds minimum. But definitely they can go above £1,000, and obviously if you're talking about the car route, obviously I suppose if you're insuring it and doing all the wear and tear and having all that fuel, that could easily be thousands of pounds worth. Not that you'd necessarily just not have a car anymore, but if you're doing a fraction of the mileage, the costs to you are maybe a fraction, and the fuel costs maybe a fraction as well. So it's not overly surprising that during COVID, when all of that was reduced, that people saved more because they just had more available money. So I suppose the takeaway lesson for that is it possible to work remotely some or all of your job? Is that worth asking for? Some people that would have been automatic for, but it is worth asking if it doesn't apply to you, and maybe by default you thought you had to go back in 5 days a week, which may or may not be the case. So there's that, or potentially looking at other jobs that are more remote, considering the savings are so big. And obviously, yes, if you work at home, you will still need to eat lunch. But if you eat leftovers or something that you potentially would be wasting in previously, or if you can make relatively low cost things, if you're probably going to be able to save money there as if you were in COVID there. And then I suppose there's the, I'm sure there's other factors, but those are like two quite big lessons. Is like the saving on the food and tea and coffee, kind of buying out when you're working in a city centre, town centre, or even in a business park, something like that. And then you've got the commuting saving there. And then it's whether you were, there's possibility that you're more productive over COVID. So if you think you work better at home, it's maybe worth looking at that kind of stuff. And then I suppose on the other side that I didn't actually mention just now is with when the demand for petrol, diesel dropped, the price dropped. Whereas so I remember that there was £1 a litre you could get fuel. So even if you were still driving, the cost was lower. Whereas if you're doing that equivalent driving now, you're easily paying £1.40 a litre for fuel. So it could be 40% higher, and you're not necessarily getting anything extra for that amount. So when thinking of that, what job you do and maybe how much you go into the office, etc. Yes, there's benefits of going to the office, but there's also costs. So it's just to have a think of those costs. And obviously people did that a little bit more in COVID, either forced or intentionally. But that's just something that we can carry on now. To have a think about in terms of the role you do. And I suppose what happened then in COVID is, I suppose, as the freedoms increased, the kind of the saving year on year, so like each quarter from 2020, I think people in the UK were saving something like 20% of their income. Then it dropped to around 13% of their income, and then it dropped to something like 7% of their income by quarter 3 2022, and I suspect it's even less than 2023 2024 because the prices have been so much higher. But it's, and obviously certain things like the market having higher costs of goods that you're bringing in from abroad, things like that we don't have much control over as individuals. Things like if your mortgage rate goes up, there's not much you can do as an individual, but it is worth looking at. Even like a fraction of a percentage drops in mortgage rates can be, it might only be £6, it might only be £25 a week, but if you multiply that over a 2-year mortgage or a 5-year mortgage, it's really quite large amounts for potentially quite small amounts of work. And it's the same would go for anything that you're paying out for, even if it's yearly. So insurance, people maybe consider what insurance they got. If you're doing less mileage, whether your insurance is cheaper for you, but also the insurer needs to know. So it's whether can you save money there? Can you save money on your energy bill by swapping? Can you save money by having less subscriptions? So there's that kind of. These are all, I suppose, saving side lessons that you can learn from COVID. So hopefully that's been useful. If you can drop any messages in the comments, if you have any other ideas of what you found helpful or what you'd like me to cover in the next video, that'd be great. Thank you now.